We're in Revelation 13, 11 through 18. And if you're watching online, the audio's not working. So you get whatever camera you get, so or audio you get. So we're going to pick up where we left off. So chapter 13, you have the dragon and the beast from the sea. And what we need to understand is that the dragon parodies the divine. And so where you have the Trinity, you're going to have an unholy Trinity. Which includes the dragon, the beast of the sea, and now in this section, the beast of the land. So, someone will read verses 11 through 18. What's that?
Where's Rebecca?
I know, she's not here yet.
And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And he performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which he has given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And there was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, that the cause of the beast might even speak, that the image of the beast might even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small, the great, the rich, the poor, free men and slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one should be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666.
All right. Wonderful stuff here. All right. What we begin with is the second beast, which forms our unholy trinity. This is a beast from the land. We are told that he exercises authority of the first beast on its behalf. What does that mean? What does the first beast do? Oh, wait. Oh, sorry. I skipped. Sorry. Let's go back to the first part. Let me actually read the section here. Okay. Instead of coming from the sea, this beast comes from the land. It's a little bit different, but remains highly influenced by Daniel's prophecy. So in Daniel chapter 7, he has a vision of 4 beasts coming from the sea. The beast of the sea earlier was a combination of these 4 beasts. The second beast is very similar to what we find in Daniel chapter 8. So in Daniel chapter 8, you have a ram that has 2 horns appearing, and the 2 horns will be parody in chapter 11's 2 witnesses. The 2 horns are a parody of the 2 witnesses of chapter 11 and the 2 lampstands. All right, and so what this beast is going to work on is the worship. What is it that people are worshiping? The earth dwellers, what are they worshiping? This beast speaks like the dragon, which makes sense, right? Why would it make sense?
Be part of it.
He's part of it, right? So the dragon and the minions are trying to imitate God. And so if there are 2 witnesses, the dragon's going to have 2 witnesses in these beasts. And he speaks like the dragon because the dragon is the one that is standing behind it. Now in verse 2 is my original question. He exercises authority of the first beast. What do we mean by that? Okay, so what did the first beast do? That's really the question. No, I'm making you guys remember from last week.
The main deceiver, liar.
But what was the first beast representative of? Yeah, I remember that from last week. So the first beast is these political powers that are opposed to God. And so the second beast, when it says he exercises the authority, it's going to include some of that. So the first beast was the political powers set against God, and this second beast will have some of that aspect. And so what he does, though, is different. He causes the earth dwellers to worship the first beast. That term, earth dweller, has been used. We talked about it a little bit. It will be used extensively throughout the rest of the book. And essentially, it's just John's technical term for non-Christians. Okay? So if you're an earth dweller, that's opposite from God's people. All right? And so the earth dwellers are those who are not Christians, and they are going to worship the first beast. So this is really the key difference between the two beasts. This one is definitely religious in nature. All right, so his focus is about turning worship towards the first beast. Then we see that detailed a little bit in verses 13 through 14. Verses 13 to 14, the beast performs spectacular signs. What do those signs remind us of? Who does it remind us of? Elijah, good job, right? So it says, fire comes down from heaven in view of everyone. Who called down fire from heaven? Elijah, right? Where did he do that? Mount Carmel, right? And so that whole issue with Mount Carmel becomes important here, right, in John's mind. So Mount Carmel, they bring all the northern kingdom together and says, who are you going to worship, God or Baal? And Baal prophets are there doing all their thing, and nothing happens. But then God does His thing, right? And they say, the Lord, He is God. Yahweh, He is God. All right. So that's in the back of John's mind, and you hear is a beast imitating that in front of everybody, with the purpose of bringing worship to that dragon. All right. And so he's what we need to realize is that Satan can perform signs like God's. All right, and we actually see that a little bit in Exodus, right? So Moses and Aaron turned the water into blood, and the magicians do what? Turn water into blood. All right, then they call forth frogs, and the magicians call forth frogs. And then God says, no more of that, right? And then the rest they can't imitate. And they're surprised. What's that? What's that? Oh yeah, the rods. The rods do the same thing, right? And what's fascinating is that when they go to that third plague, they're expecting to have success, and they're surprised when they don't. All right, and so they definitely can. Satan can definitely imitate. Satan can imitate God's worship or God's acts, signs. All right, and so the result is the people worship the first beast due to the signs. And if we're looking at John's day, we definitely can think of the emperor cult that's going on. All right, so historically, Caesar, the statue of Caesar had been erected in Asia Minor. The first known emperor worship occurs in 29 BC. All right, and so we're talking about 130 years since then, roughly. All right, and here they are sitting there worshiping. It also says that they put a statue up, right? Yeah, an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Okay, and so we definitely can think of the emperor cults, right? They're worshiping the statue. We can also have what else in the back of our mind? Who else put a statue and demanded worship? Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 3, right? And so maybe that's in the back of our minds. It's Daniel's 3 friends that say we're not going to do that. All right, and so you have all of this being tossed around. And what happens to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they refuse to worship? There's persecution, right? And I think that's in the back of John's mind as well. And if you're reading this, you should have that in the back of your mind. If you're not going to worship the first beast, if you're not going to worship political powers, there might be persecution as a result of it. All right, verse 15, it says that failure to worship the beast's image results in death, right? So those who, the image speaks and causes those who refuse to worship the image to be killed. So definitely could be thinking about Daniel 3 here. We should not necessarily think of this maybe as widespread persecution in John's day, but it definitely was happening as far as if you were not worshiping the emperor, then you were being killed for it. And so for John's people, right, these people in Asia Minor, I mean, they're dealing with all of this. And then John's trying to make sure that they understand that it's okay, that persecution does not mean that God's not with us. All right? And so you shouldn't want to compromise to escape persecution, because what Jesus said, those who want to save their lives must lose it, and those who don't do that will lose it, right? You try to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life, you'll save it. I mean, it's that paradoxical understanding of things.
It's a win-win.
Yes, sort of. So, then verses 16 through 17 shows another type of control. And what type of control is that? What's that? I'm sorry, what?
Put a mark on you.
Right, but what does it control? What does it say it controls? Economy, yes. All right, so the last power that this beast has is power over the economy. And the reason is because the mark allows you to buy or sell, right? And that's kind of here. I will say this is probably not UPCs being barcodes on your heads, and it's probably not subdermal chips, okay? It's probably not what John is trying to say. Instead, we've already seen a group of people that have a mark on their foreheads and hands. What's that group that already has this mark? Christians, right? The 144,000. And to re-emphasize that, the very first thing that happens in chapter 14, which is in 2 verses, is this group of Christians again, right? The 144,000, and it particularly says in chapter 14:1, because they have the mark of God on their foreheads and on their hands, right? So that is what we should be thinking about, okay? And so we need to recognize and remember, why were these people marked? Why were the 144 marked? I know it's been a while. That was chapter 7, I believe, is when they talk about the marking for them. So in chapter 7, it says that they're marked for their protection, right? He says, wait to bring about one of the seals, I think. Wait until they have been marked, and then they go and they get marked. And again, we also have to ask the question, not only why were they marked, but in what sense were they marked? Right? And I think we argued there that it's a spiritual mark, not necessarily something that you physically see. Okay, and so if the 144 is a spiritual mark, why would we make this mark of the beast non-spiritual?
Because they can't decipher spiritual things.
What's that?
They can't decipher spiritual things.
Right, but I'm saying Christians are the ones that, I mean, it's Christians that get upset and say, well, UPCs, these subdermal chips, those are the mark of the beast. Like, how many times have you heard that in the last 50 years?
I've heard the mark in the forehead, but I never heard of the UPC code.
Oh yeah, the mark being a UPC code. You haven't heard that? Really? That's fascinating because I just turn on the radio and if it's anybody talking about Revelation, that's what they're talking
They
about.
throw out there, isn't it?
It's what they throw out there. You know, like you get.
When you say UPC code, is it the same thing as the UPC codes you scan
Yes.
out?
Yes.
All right, let's go to Google here.
Check it out in a moment.
Stop. Got it.
You have to remember my age, Tony. They didn't.
No, you're good.
No, I'm just saying they didn't have UPC codes when I became a Christian. That's for sure.
All right, mark of the beast. Let's just look at images and let's see what pops up. Oh, look, subdermal chip. I mean, that's a barcode with. Oh, here. Where's that picture? There you go. Look at that barcode, right? Now this one is dealing with COVID, so I mean, almost right away. Besides the 666 here, like the pictures with it include those two ideas. Why? Because that's what Christians are saying, or certain Christians, right? And so what I come back to is why are we trying to make this literal when everything else in this passage? Here's another great one. Look. Barcode. There you go, right? All right. So why are we trying to make this non-spiritual? That's what I want to ask there, right? So no, I don't think it's UPC codes. If the 144 are marked in a spiritual sense, then this mark needs to be spiritual as well. So what is being communicated? What I think is being communicated, and we'll talk about more in a little bit, is your hand is the source of actions in your life. Your head is the source of thoughts. And what I think is being said here is you're going to do things with your head. You're going to think certain ways and act in certain ways that are in alignment with the beast and with the dragon. Or you can think and act in certain ways that are in alignment with the lamb. And those are your two options. And which one you choose to do, which way you choose to think and which way you choose to act, that's your mark. That is the mark that you have. Now, there are some literal events that do happen that explain this, that if you're not thinking like the rest of the world, if you're not worshiping the beasts, then you can't buy and sell. All right, we definitely see that in the times of Diocletian and Decius. This is the late 200s. Diocletian becomes emperor. He redivides the empire into 4 standards. And in Diocletian's mind, the problem with the empire was that they weren't worshiping the idols. And so he issued a decree. It's the first universal decree that said you must sacrifice to the emperor in order to be able to buy and sell things. And the way that they proved that was you got a slip of paper. They didn't put a mark on you. They gave you a slip of paper that said, yes, I've done this. And then you'd have to show that in order to buy stuff. Right? And it's Christians in Africa who said, we're not doing that. And then are persecuted because of it. Now, some of them do, but a vast majority of them don't. All right? And so they don't get that piece of paper. And so we do have examples of that. And there's probably other examples where, as Christians, it can be a harm. I think we're maybe starting to see some of it in America, right? Someone comes in and says, hey, will you bake me a cake? And they say no. And so what do? We boycott. You're not allowed to do business here anymore. Right? And so we need to recognize that these are very real possibilities, but it still doesn't matter. I think I got ahead of myself. I think the placement matters because thinking and acting in accordance with the mark's owner is really what John is trying to get across here. Okay? And so he's trying to communicate that with this. And again, I don't think it's going to be a physical thing. It's definitely a spiritual thing. All right. And I think
We'll know they're Christians by their love.
Right, by the way that we're acting.
Yeah, and the other way around too. The scripture I read this morning, if you hate your brother,
Yep.
you're a murderer, you know, so.
Yeah.
I've seen in law enforcement deal with a lot of people, and I've looked at people, and I'm pretty sure, were, you know, Satan they had a demon in them, and it was their actions that showed me that, not anything physical.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just one of those, I mean, it's just, we can definitely see it. And so it matters. How we think and how we act really does matter. And really how we think it affects how we act. And so we do have to recognize that. All right. Then we get to the fun stuff. He says here, this calls for wisdom. So verse 18 is definitely a parenthetical note on John's part. He's saying, hey, here's the theological reflection. This is what you should know. The mark of the beast, the number of the beast is calculated as that of the man 666. This is, of course, hotly debated. What does 666 mean? And there are three major interpretations that we're going to talk about. The first is that this is a particular name using a break form of what's called gematria. I'm going to butcher that. Gematria, I'm going to say it. And gematria is used pretty significantly. So in ancient languages, they did not have numbers like we have numbers. Instead, their letters were their numbers. So in English, A would be 1, B would be 2, C would be 3, and so on and so forth. And so then if you have a name like my name, which I did not do this beforehand, so I can't tell you what my number is. You could give a number to these, add them up, and then it gives you the new number. Okay, and so that's essentially what is assumed by this. All right, so who do they assume it is? The most common name given in this case is the guy Nero. Nero is a pretty big deal still at this point in time. There was a Roman legend going around that he didn't actually commit suicide, but that he had gone off into the land of the Parthians, which is this empire that was able to resist the Romans pretty well, and that someday he was gathering an army to come back and destroy Vespasian and Titus and Domitian. Okay, so that was kind of the fear going around, and so they say, oh, John's referring to this thing, Nero. The problem is there's a couple problems with it. One, Nero doesn't add up unless you add Nero Caesar and you translate it in a particular way into Hebrew and you drop a letter when you do that translation into Hebrew. So basically, one commentator, as he was trying to explain this, says that these are the rules that are followed for this. Okay, so lots of names are given. These are the common rules that happen. Okay, first, you have to use the proper name of the person. But if that doesn't work out, like if you choose, say, Adolf Hitler, right, and you're trying to make him 666. Okay, let's just say Hitler. It doesn't quite add up to 666. The second rule is add a title. Okay, so what was Hitler's title?
Scumbag.
I don't remember what it was, but it was something like
Führer?
What's that?
Führer?
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
No, this looks like a smiling face.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it has a whatever that's called. So then you add this up, and then if it still doesn't add up to 666, you can translate it into, you choose Hebrew or Latin. Okay. So if we translate it into Hebrew or Latin, maybe then we can get 666. I don't know why Latin is just, I mean, another language at that time. And if this doesn't work, don't worry about spelling.
So in other words, if you want it to be that, you just go ahead and write it.
Yes, more or less. So I can get any one of your names following these rules to be 666. So if I don't really like you, you're the mark, right? It's your name. And that's essentially what happens. Like if you look throughout history when they're trying to use this form of interpretation, this is what they end up doing. So what can we probably assume?
Not right.
probably not right. Like if we can't even like we could say Caesar Nero maybe works, but you do have to drop a letter in the Hebrew to make it work. So still don't worry about the spelling. But even beyond that, why Caesar Nero and why not all of his titles? Because he doesn't just have his title isn't just Caesar Nero. It's something ridiculously long because that's how Romans work. Okay, so there's a lot of things with it that doesn't seem to work out. The second option is that the number is talking about the duration of time for the beast. This is kind of weird. I literally wrote 2 lines on it. Some people say this. Not very many people agree that this is the case. It's kind of a weird one. So then that leaves us with a third major option. That is to view it symbolically. And I think that this is probably more accurate. Other numbers in Revelation are symbolic. So it would be strange for this one not to be. It's kind of where I fall on it. Now, the number of man can also be translated the number of humanity. I don't want to go too much into it, but if you look at 21:17, you see something very similar in this way. Uses similar phrasing. And so then if this is the case, what is the symbolism? Well, if we recognize that 7 is perfection, then 6 would be imperfection. Why 3s? Well, this would show the complete imperfection of this. And so while the dragon may seem holy, he and his minions are far from it. And I think throughout this chapter and the one before, we've seen some of that, right? Like they have 7 crowns. Why 7 crowns? Well, 7 represents perfection, and crowns represents royalty. And what the dragon is professing is that he is truly worthy of worship and following. But we know from history that that is far from the case. Like he is not leading us to a good spot. All right, and so we see that, and even this Trinity is in mockery of God and what He does, and so we can probably say that this falls in line with that understanding. So that's kind of where I would fall on it. It's probably just more symbolic than if it's in one person in history. So, all right, what can we learn from this passage?
Don't expect to see a literal mark.
Okay, don't expect to see a lower mark.
Beast tries to imitate.
Yeah, the beast will try to imitate God. What else? I focus more on the economic side of things. I said, though we may gain economic benefit in worshiping the beast, in the end it is in perfect security. So no matter how much money you gain, money won't save you, right? And so if you worship the beast to gain economic security, in the end, that's the worst thing. And so that's kind of what I focused on that, the purpose of the mark, right? All right, chapter 14 I couldn't find a good picture of each individual part of chapter 14, so I got one picture that kind of does all of it for the most part, sort of. So chapter 14 is a series of 3 interconnected visions that kind of play off of what we just talked about in chapter 12 and 13. So someone will read verses 1 through 5. We might get through that.
Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters, and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except for the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless.
All right, this vision stands in contrast to the vision in chapter 13. There's several things that they both have. They both have a lamb. They both have one that has appeared as if slain. And so there's some contrast, right? And so what John does is he's talked about the beasts. He's had three visions, really. The dragon and the woman, the beast of the sea, the beast of the lamb. And now he's going to have three visions of the lamb and what's going on with him. Okay? So we have these 6 visions back to back to back. The lamb is standing where? Mount Zion. What is Mount Zion? Jerusalem. Yes, Zion is another name for Jerusalem in the Old Testament. Anytime that it is always used with the idea of redemption, or nearly always. Very few times is it not. So whenever God is condemning Jerusalem, he'll use Jerusalem. Whenever he says, "I'm bringing you back," it's Zion. Okay, so that's why it's used. Now here we probably can view it as an antithesis to Babylon. And so Babylon in Revelation is going to be that negative city, that bad city. We're going to see that once we get to chapters 16, 17, and 18. But for now, we're just recognizing Zion here. We probably shouldn't read it as a literal place. In this case, it's probably more figurative. The God's redemptive mountain. Maybe even heaven at this point in time. Who else is with the Lamb? Yeah, the 144,000, right? And we particularly are told the name of God is on their foreheads, right? And so the point is to stay in contrast to this 666 from the verse literally right before, right? So we have that contrast. The 144,000 are Revelation 7. They are we argued there that it was the complete people of God, not just 144,000, but all of God's people. And then there's, again, that emphasis on the sealing in contrast to what's just taking place. Verse 2 to 3, we're told that John hears a loud noise, which is the song of the redeemed. And this is probably, again, emphasizing the fact that it's not just 144,000, but all of God's people. Okay, all of the redeemed sing this, for that to be as loud as it is. Okay. It does say that they have harps playing. There are 3 times in Revelation where we're told that harps are used in song. They are in 5, 8 through 9, and in 15, 2 through 3. So in the next chapter, we're going to see it again. And then here. So 3 total times. In chapter 5, there's a praise over the victory. Both of these are songs of victory. Okay. In chapter 5, it says victory over sin that is celebrated with harps. In chapter 15, it'll be victory over the beast, his image, and his number. We'll see that again. So when we recognize that there's 2 other uses of harps, and it's always a song of victory, what should we probably recognize here?
From God.
That this song is a song of victory, right? All right, so chapter 5 is a song of victory, chapter 15 is a song of victory. This is a song of victory that's being sung, okay? And so that, again, is emphasized by the fact that they are singing a new song, okay? The concept of a new song is used over and over and over again in the Old Testament, and anytime it says, let us sing a new song, it's always in connection with the idea of victory, okay? So Psalms 33:3, 43, 96:1, 98:1, 144:9, 149:1, and Isaiah 42:10 all talk about having songs of victory. Let us sing a new song to the Lord, a song of victory. Okay? So we are praising God for his victory over the enemy. And then at the very end, we're told that only the redeemed can learn this song. Interestingly, these verses that are I mentioned in the Jewish rabbis teaching, the Midrashes and the Targums, they apply these verses to the Messiah. So he's saying these songs of victory will come with the Messiah. All right, so John's doing the same thing here. These are new songs, a song of victory that was sung because of the Messiah, the Lamb. We get, at the very end of this small section, verses 4 through 5, 3 descriptions of the 144,000. First, they are not defiled by women, but are virgins. So, what does he mean by that? Glad you asked. There's a couple of literal interpretations where we're saying these people are, it is what it says it is, that they are celibate men, maybe women, but definitely men, because they're not defiled by women, okay? And so that's out there. The only problem with this is that nowhere in the Bible is sex within marriage considered a bad thing. In fact, Paul encourages the Corinthians not to withhold sex from your partner except for an agreed upon time frame. So it would be kind of strange to be praising the fact that these are virgins. Okay, it's kind of an interesting thing if it's a literal interpretation. Another one is that these are people who have not committed sexual immorality. So sexual marriage is one thing. This is sexual immorality. And in idol worship, there was a lot of prostitute worship as part of it, and you would have sex in honor of the god. Kind of a weird thing for us to think about, but that's kind of what was happening. Both of these first two views do have the problem of trying to read something too literal that's definitely highly symbolic. Okay, I think even the harps in the new song, it's a symbolism of victory that's being communicated. The 144 is definitely symbolic, and so it would be kind of weird to see this here. Another view, and this is kind of a weird view, it's a figurative view. It views 144,000 as a military arm of God's redeemed. So it's a separate group from the multitudes. And in Jewish, in the Old Testament, if you are a part of the army, you are not supposed to sleep with women, even if they were your wife. So if you're going into war, you have to abstain. All right. And so that's kind of what this view kind of does. I think it probably is ignoring the symbolism of the 144,000, right? Like 12 times 12 is just an emphasis on the number 12. So it's like saying, put 3 exclamation marks, right? It's kind of saying that, and that's talking about the perfection of God's people, the complete people of God. And the same thing, 10 times 10 times 10 is just, again, exclamation marks on the idea of 10, which again is the completion of God's people, or the complete perfectness of it. So it's probably ignoring the symbolism of that number to say what it says. But it's better than the literal views is where I would go. The last one says that's probably talking about not compromising with the world. In particular, in just a few chapters, we're going to talk about the whore of Babylon. Okay? So these are those that haven't slept with women or virgins, have not gone to the whore of Babylon. So we'll have to talk about her in a little bit, but for right now, I think we could probably say these are people who have not compromised with her. Additionally, we can add to this the idea that in Revelation 21, the church is presented as the perfect bride of Christ. In the Jewish world, to be a perfect bride is to be a virgin. All right, and so maybe that's what's being emphasized here. Is these are people who have not compromised with the world. They are ready to be presented as the bride of Christ. So that's kind of what I lean towards on there. So that's the first thing. We are described as those not defiled by women, but are virgins. The second thing here is that they follow the Lamb and are redeemed as first fruits. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. right? Again, uncompromising in their faith. Where he says go, we go, even if it means dying for his sake. Then we're talked about, or we're redeemed as the first fruits. First fruits are mentioned in Revelation 5:9. That's not true. It should say the idea of redemption is mentioned in 5:9. So where they're singing the harps, right? The Lamb has redeemed for himself everyone from every tribe, person, place, and nation. All right, and so we have that idea of redemption. That's what that should say. Now, first fruits is a different idea, and what we have to kind of figure out is what is being talked about here. Sometimes when first fruits is used in the Old Testament, is use of the idea of an impending further harvest, right? The Passover, you were to bring your first fruits. Pentecost, you were to bring your first fruits of the harvest as part of your worship to God. It was the best, it was the first, and there was the understanding that you would have another harvest later on. So you give God the first thing that comes, and he would bless you with the second thing that comes. All right, some of that, sometimes it's that, but that's not always the case. So in Jeremiah 2:3, Israel is called the first fruits of God's harvest from Egypt. Okay? Which is interesting because we've been talking a lot about Egypt. So my question is, what is the rest of the harvest of Egypt? If Israel was the first fruit, what was the further fruit?
The harvest of Egypt. That doesn't have to do with the firstborn being taken away by the Holy Spirit.
Maybe, so judgment. My question is, if first fruits includes the idea of a further harvest, okay, something else that's coming, what's this other thing that's coming?
Salvation of the Gentiles? Or everyone?
Well, so what I'm saying is Jeremiah 2, so sometimes first fruit includes that idea, but not always. And one of the examples is Jeremiah 2, right? Is that right? Yeah, Jeremiah 2:3. He calls Israel the first fruits of the harvest of Egypt. And so, do we have another harvest of Egypt? And the answer is no, right? Like nothing else comes out of Egypt. Israel's all that God rescues. He doesn't go back and rescue another people group. It's just Israel, right? So there is no further harvest. Similarly, Ezekiel 20:40 also has a similar concept. So first fruit doesn't have to mean there's more to come. Sometimes first fruit is all that there is. Okay? So when these people are called first fruits, I think that's all that's preserved for God. There's 3 visions in chapter 14. The third vision is a harvest vision, but it's harvest of judgment. All right, so if, Rebecca, your idea, your concept of the first form being taken away is probably more accurate to this idea of first fruits in this passage. Okay?
But he did say, bringing his, I think it was when Joseph and Mary went into Egypt. There is a scripture that says when he.
Yeah, because he summoned his son out. Yeah, but that's more because Jesus imitates Israel,
Okay.
right? He reenacts Israel to be the perfect Israel. So where Israel fails, Christ does it perfectly. Right? He goes into the wilderness and he perfectly resists temptation. Compared to the Israelites who are in the wilderness, and what do they do almost every single time?
Yeah.
God would rather go back to Egypt.
Wandered and wandered.
Yeah, yeah. So that's more of the imitation that Matthew's trying to set up. So I say this to say that the 144,000 probably is not a separate group, the first fruit, and then we expect a further harvest. Rather, they are the only group, and it's just further emphasizing the fact that this is the complete people of God, because the later harvest is a judgment harvest. And then the last thing he says, I forgot to put 3 on there, but the last thing is that they imitate the Lamb. And they imitate him by being blameless and without a lie, without lie in their mouths. And there's 2 important passages that kind of talk about this. Isaiah 53:9 is the suffering servant passage. And one of the things that Isaiah says there is that the lamb has no deceit in its mouth. so if you're a part of God's people, you will imitate the Lamb and not have deceit in your mouth. Then you have 1 Peter 2:22, which uses the same Isaiah passages, quotes it, and then tells us that Christians should endure persecution for doing good. He says something to the effect of, if you are persecuted because you've done evil, you deserved it. But if you've been persecuted because you've done good, it's because you're imitating Jesus. And so you should expect persecution if you are imitating the Lamb. And I think that's kind of what John is trying to say here too, right? You will face persecution, but it's because you are imitating the Lamb, and you have no deceit in your mouth, and you're copying him. Okay, so what do we learn from this small section?
Jesus is kind.
Okay.
Is that what it shows there, or am I thinking further down the line?
I mean, it's not. I mean, he says he sees him. And what's going to happen? I mean, we didn't read the rest of the chapter, but we'll do it next week. We're going to have warnings, and then we're going to have judgment, where Jesus is given a sickle and like. So here's the picture, right? Jesus with a sickle in his hand and a harvest, and over here it's kind of hiding behind this black, but people are crushing out the grapes of wrath. That's all in the next 2 sections. So I put the true Lamb is worthy of praise and imitation, right? We're praising him, singing a new song of victory, but we're also imitating him by the way that we live. And so really what we almost have is a contrast between the 2 sections that I read today, which is awesome, it works out. Who are you going to imitate?
The true Lamb.
The true Lamb or the false Lamb, the beasts, right? And those are the two options that we are given in this world. And for Christians, John is saying that true Lamb is the one that is the one we should be following. 144, I think, take a back seat. We're not going to really see them again. So they kind of appear here just as a contrast to those who are getting the beast of the mark of the beast.